To all those reading this, I am not a sick man. That's what they want you to believe. Phew, my superiors, the bosses, the men upstairs in the New York Fire Department who have described me as delusional and suffering from post-traumatic stress. They cannot and will not silence me. I am not delusional, nor sick for that matter, but as healthy as any day in my 48 years on this planet. So if they think that by putting me on sick leave will stop me from talking, then they are wrong. Very wrong. I warned them. I told them that if they did not listen to me, I would go public. And I guess this is it. I am forced to share my account on the internet because I want answers. I want to get closure on the deaths of my 2 colleagues, 2 of my closest friends, who went down with me that night into the Manhattan sewer, but did not come back up. I want answers for their families, their wives, and children who need to know the truth about what we saw. I want the public to know about the monster lurking underneath New York streets, and that is why I write now. So let me start from the beginning. 3 months ago, myself, Robson, Matthews, and Johnson were on the night shift when we received a call at 0100 hours. We were actually playing ball in the court when the lieutenant came and told us there was someone stuck down a sewer on West 15th Street. He wanted us there as soon as possible. I told him that's what we were here for, boss, before sinking a 3-pointer and receiving the middle finger from Matthews. Exactly 2 minutes and 10 seconds later, we were on the road. Approximately 12 minutes later, we were on the scene. Even though it was early morning, the busy Manhattan street was filled with young revelers walking between nearby bars and clubs. Matthews was driving and pulled the fire truck beside the sidewalk. We got out to find 5 college kids standing around an open manhole, the rusted grate lying at their feet. "What's the situation here?" I asked upon arrival. Across the street, thumping music spilled out of a club doorway, where 2 bouncers stood, watching us, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights of the fire truck. One of the college kids, a pretty girl in a black dress, flicked her cigarette into the shadows and stepped forward. "There's someone stuck down there." We were walking past and heard him calling for help, so we opened up the grate. She glanced at the hole. "But a couple of minutes ago, it went quiet, so you might be too late." I nodded and walked over to the manhole. Even in the brightness of nighttime, New York, not one ray of light seemed to penetrate through its blackness. The kid stepped back as I stooped down and cocked my head, listening. I could hear nothing but the pulsing club music and the chatter of passers-by. I got out my flashlight and shone it into the hole, scanning around for the person in trouble. It was a typical arched sewer and was about 8 feet down to the water level, which was perhaps a further foot in depth. I stuck my head inside and was greeted by the strong smell of sewage. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing around the tunnel. "Is anybody down here?" I pulled my head back up and glanced at the kids. They shifted their gaze uneasily between one another. "I can see no one." The pretty girl stepped forward. "We're not lying. They have better things to do with our time." I looked back at my colleagues waiting by the truck. They all shrugged, awaiting my call. I knew none of them wanted to go down. I turned back to the manhole and called again. "Hello, is anyone down there?" I waited, listening, and just when I was about to give the kids another look that said thanks for wasting our precious time, I heard something. It was faint, very faint, but it came deep within the tunnels, a whimpering voice that said, "Help me please." I stuck my head back inside. "Hey, sir," I shouted, "are you okay?" "No, please help me." I looked back at my colleagues. "Robson, Matthews, mask up. We're going down." "Johnson, you stay up here and call for an ambulance. Whoever is stuck down there is going to need one." Johnson nodded. He didn't know it at the time, but he was one lucky bastard. The other 2 would never resurface from that hole. Now, before we proceed with the story, I want to tell you a little bit about New York's sewer system. It dates back to the mid-19th century and is over 6,500 miles in length, which is approximately the distance between Central Park to Alaska and back. Quite a distance, right? Well, let me tell you, in my 25 years serving as a fireman, I've been called to 6 jobs involving the sewers, and I've hated each one. You better believe that underneath our feet is another world, a dark underworld, you might say, filled with rats, cockroaches, and an endless amount of secrets. 6 years ago in Harlem, we pulled an old man out of a sewer. He was half blind, so he hadn't seen the construction work, and fell into a manhole. poor guy nearly died. Anyway, I was one of those who went down to get him. I was only down there for 15 minutes, but those 15 minutes felt like days, and when you are down there, your mind is like a dog let off the leash, running away with an endless number of what-ifs. What if the ceiling collapses? What if the water levels suddenly rise? What if that strange noise you can hear deep in the tunnel is a monster slowly crawling towards you? And that is what I was thinking about as we masked up, ready to descend. Other passers-by had stopped to join the college kids, and now a whole congregation seemed to be watching in the street, like a morbid sending-off party. It came with the job. Most people carried on walking when the police were involved, or out of politeness for ambulance crews. But for the fire service, people thought it was a free ticket to the circus. Hey, let's watch Johnny disappear down a black hole. $10 says he never makes it back up. I was the first into the sewer. The water level turned out to be much higher than I had predicted and came up to my knees, something I wasn't too pleased about. Floating in the slimy gruel were condoms, and Mr. Newman's recently flushed excrement from the apartment 6, 2 blocks down. The smell was also much stronger down here. Robson and Matthews followed me soon after, their muttering and cursing amplified by the brick walls. Puts you off your midnight snacks being down here, don't it, boys? I joked as we waded towards the bend. He's just round the corner, or so I thought. We stood in a T-junction, scanning each direction to see if we could find anyone. It turned out there was only an endless tunnel stretching off into blackness. Do you hear that? Matthews said. Robson and I turned. Hear what? Exactly, Matthews replied. He shone his torch back down towards the manhole, where we had descended. You can't hear anything. What happened to the noise outside? We listened. He was right. You couldn't hear anything but our hoarse breathing underneath our masks. That was when the silence was broken by a splashing noise, as if someone or something was moving down there in the darkness. We all jerked around and pointed our torches towards the sound. There was nothing but the rippling sewage water that was returning to stillness. What the hell was that? Matthews asked, breathing hard. I don't know, I said, squinting. Hello, anyone down there? Matthews swore loudly. Screw this. Let's get out of here. This place is giving me the creeps. Robson murmured in agreement. I was about to answer and give them the rant about saving lives when the splashing noise came again. Only this time it was louder and moving towards us. We all froze. There was something moving down there in the darkness, but it was difficult to make out what it was and had way too many legs and arms to be human. I cleared my throat, my heart pounding. Okay, let's get out of here. The next part, however, still puzzles me the most. We returned to find no manhole. The ceiling was bricked over like no entrance had ever existed. Where's it gone? Matthews shouted. He scrambled about the wall as we all searched with our torches for the exit. It was here, right here. Calm down, I urged. We probably went further than you think. Don't worry, it will be here somewhere. But even as I said it, I felt a lurch of fear, and that splashing noise sounded again, closer, like it was turning the corner of the T-junction. Matthews shot me a disgusted look, but remained silent, and with no other option, we continued trudging onwards, keenly aware of that thing behind. We never did find the manhole. It seemed to have vanished, disappeared into the brickwork as if it never existed. What we did find, however, was a nearby doorway, and to spare you, the reader, the horrors of experiencing what I had, I will try to keep the description brief. Think of it as an underground operating theater, because that is what we found when we opened the creaking wooden door set into the wall of the sewer. It was a medium-sized chamber, and in the center of the room was an operating table, its surface stained with dried blood. Nearby, on a bench, lay surgical equipment, scalpels, scissors, syringes. The walls were adorned with shelves filled with large jars and containers, each holding human organs or deformed body parts. But that is not the most sickening part about the room. No, the worst was the mutilated bodies hanging like pig carcasses from chains on the ceiling. There were 8 of them, some with legs missing, other arms. Mostly their faces were intact, frozen in expressions of grotesque terror and agony. We stood there in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the scene. 10 minutes earlier, we were descending into the darkness on a rescue mission, and now we were witnesses to multiple homicides, or perhaps some twisted experiments gone wrong. Panic began to set in, and Matthews, who who had been on edge since we first entered the sewer, seemed on the verge of losing control. "We need to get the hell out of here," he whispered. Robson dropped to his knees and began to vomit. I continued to scan the room until my eyes fell upon a dead body slumped against the stone wall. The dead man was dressed in a white lab coat, and in one hand, he held a revolver which he had used to end his own life. In his other hand, there was a note. I carefully retrieved the note from his hand and began to read. To the person reading this, beware the creature in the deep. I am Victor, and he is my Frankenstein. Matthews took the note from me and read it out loud. I am Victor, and he is my Frankenstein. He muttered, "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "Victor Frankenstein," I answered glumly. "The doctor in Mary Shelley's book who creates a monster to cheat death." Maybe this person was conducting similar experiments. I looked at Robson as if to validate my theory. He was deathly pale and looked back at me blankly. Gen Z, I thought. And what about the creature in the deep? Matthews asked. Is that the thing outside splashing around? How am I supposed to know? I responded angrily. All I know is that we need to get back to surface level and call the cops and tell them about Ted Bundy's basement down here. Easier said than done, Robson muttered. I sighed. Well, unless you two want to stay in here and wait for Scooby-Doo to turn up, I suggest we get the hell out. They both looked at the stone floor. No further arguments. Good, I said. I'll go first. Robson in the middle. Matthews, you take the rear. Not for the first time, too. I'm not going at the back. Matthews protested. I value my life. Fine, I shouted. You go first, and I'll go at the back. Solved. It didn't really matter who went first, since we were all within an inch of each other as we left the room and headed back out into the sewer. The silence was deafening, and as we waded through the murky water, I kept having images of a rotten hand grabbing my leg, dragging me below the surface. We weren't far out of the room when the splashing noise sounded ahead of us. We shone our torches at it, and that's when we saw it. The creature, it had a human body, but it had 4 arms and 4 legs, giving it the appearance of a grotesque spider-human hybrid. Its eyes were bloodshot, and blood dripped down from its mouth as it snarled at us. This must have been the Frankenstein, I thought, because you could even make out the stitching around the creature's skin, where extra body parts had been sewn onto the joints. There was even a wedding ring still on one of the hands, which glinted in the torchlight. As for its face, it was unmistakably human, with features that appeared to belong to a homeless man. Its eyes seemed to glow bright red in the darkness, almost robotic, like some arachnoid human cyborg. Now, I am not ashamed to say that out of the 2 human survival responses, fight or flight, we wisely chose the latter. I think Robson broke first, but regardless of who it was, we all turned and fled back towards the operating room as fast as our legs could carry us. I reached the room first, swiftly followed by Robson. Matthews, however, fell slightly behind and had barely squeezed inside the door before the snapping jaws of the creature came crashing against it. Once inside, I held the door closed while Robson and Matthews hauled one of the wooden shelves against it. Afterwards, we collapsed to the floor, shaking. What the hell are we gonna do now? Matthews cried, panting for breath. Wait, I said. We wait until they send a team down here to get us. Little did I know, but we were going to wait a long time. It turned out to be more than hours. It might have been days. I couldn't say. All I do know, though, is that the liquid in the jars filled with body parts became more and more appealing during that time. To call us dehydrated would be an understatement. Those heavy fire suits had stripped us of our fluids, and even after stripping down to a t-shirt and underwear, we continued to lose more water due to the stuffiness of the room. And so we waited among the mutilated bodies, sharing the place with New York's very own Victor Frankenstein. Oh, it must be pointed out, he looked as miserable as us as we waited, praying that a rescue party would be sent down there to save us. Sure, we could have tried to venture outside again, but would you? I don't think so, not with Spider-Man prowling out there. No way, Jose. During that time we slept. I don't know how often, but I remember waking some point to find that Matthews had claimed the operating table. He looked cozy, sleeping on the soft padding. I felt irritated that I hadn't thought of that. Typical Matthews. Snidey man. I looked round to see what Robson had claimed. Robson, where was he? I shook Matthews awake, his eyes darting around the room in confusion, before he registered where he was. Robson's gone. What do you mean, gone? Matthews asked, his voice trembling with fear. I mean he's not here. Matthews swore loudly and got to his feet. We have to go look for him. I didn't answer at first and realized that Matthews had registered the doubt on my face. Yes, I said, hesitantly, let's go look for him. Opening that door was quite possibly the hardest thing I have ever done. The fear of the unknown weighed on us, and the realization that we might die in this underground maze was a disturbing thought indeed. With flashlights in our hands, we moved forward, calling out for Robson, but there was no sign of Robson, and we would never find any sign of him, and to this day, his body has never been found. Why he left that room, I cannot say. Madness, possibly, I would rather not know, for the knowledge of how Matthews died is enough to torture me for a lifetime. It was as we went about searching for Robson that Matthews twisted his ankle. He caught his foot in a missing brick in the sewer, and his screams brought our search mission temporarily to a halt. Breathing heavily, I returned to his side. How bad is it? The whiteness in his face told me all I needed to know. He let out a whimper. I can't walk. That's when a guttural sound came from down in the tunnels. It was a low, inhuman growl that seemed to reverberate about the walls. Matthews and I exchanged terrified glances. The creature was coming. Instinctively, I stepped back, away from Matthews. Help me, he called, his hand outstretched. Please. The growling got louder. Matthews' eyes bulged, his face gleaming with sweat. Help me, he screamed. Help me. It was odd to hear a voice so desperate, so pleading. I was his friend, and he needed me like never before. But what did I do? I continued to inch backward. Please, he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. Don't leave me, please. Think of my wife and children. I'm not leaving you, I tried to say, but I remained silent until he disappeared into the darkness. That's when I turned and bolted, listening to his terrifying pleas, calling my name over and over. For another minute, his voice echoed around the sewers, the last minute of his life. Then that being, that beast in the Manhattan sewers, took him. I listened from afar as it devoured him alive, the creature chuckling because it wanted him to suffer. I never did hear his last breath. They found me a day later on the banks of the Hudson River at low tide, delirious, and in need of serious medical attention. They said I was mumbling the word Frankenstein repeatedly while they took me away in the ambulance.